Kansas, the land of rolling hills and prairies. As of 2024, almost 3 million people call this place home. But Kansas has another interesting characteristic, an unusually high amount of hauntings. In my research, I even found numerous sources that called it the most haunted state in the US. Here are 5 creepy haunted places in Kansas. By the way, I won't be covering Stull Cemetery on this list because I've already covered it twice before on this channel. I will leave a link to the latest video I did on it up in the cards and down below if you want to check it out. Now, on to the video. Jackson Park in Atchison is a 100-acre area filled with amenities like walking trails, volleyball courts, and a scenic view of the Missouri River. But Molly's Hollow, located within the park, gives visitors a little taste of the paranormal with their outdoor experience. There are numerous different versions of the legend, and some of them have very little in common. In one, Molly was a slave girl who was lynched for having a relationship with a white boy. In another, she was a high school student found dead in the hollow the morning after prom. Yet another, kind of similar version, says she was killed by her boyfriend after refusing to take their relationship to the next level. Other versions still say she climbed the tree for whatever reason and ended up falling to her death. Whatever actually happened, the tree is no longer there, but the stories persist. People visiting the area at night claim to see the ghost of a young woman or hear her cries for help. An eerie presence, touching by unseen hands, orbs, and an overwhelming feeling of sadness have also been reported. The paranormal activity is said to increase on the anniversary of Molly's death, though for obvious reasons, this exact date is unknown. St. Jacob's Well is a permanent pond in the Big Basin Prairie Preserve in southern Kansas. It's amassed all sorts of legends over the years, including reports that it's bottomless, has never been empty, or is even home to blind fish. Most of these stories are either unproven or fully debunked. In truth, the well is less than 60 feet deep. I've also seen stories of unrecovered bodies being in the well, bodies of the victims of people who drowned trying to find the bottom of the well. I can't confirm these stories, but I've seen enough cave diving videos for it to at least sound plausible. But the most famous legend associated with the well is that of the ghost cowboy who drowned along with his horse after falling into the well. Reports of this story stretch all the way back to the late 1800s, though there was an alleged eyewitness account of the cowboy in 1924. The witness claimed to have seen the horse and rider around 1 a.m. He thought it was strange that someone was out there so late, but figured he was probably just letting his horse drink. Then, the witness watched as the man and his horse disappeared out of sight, and a moment later, a sound rang through the air, a sound this witness could only describe as the sound made by a dying horse. The witness rode out on his own horse to check things out, but he could never find the horse or rider again. Today, people hear horrible screams they attribute to the ghost cowboy, as well as the spirits of those who drowned in the well. Also known as the Wagner House, this beautiful home was built between 1884 and 1886 for its original owner, B.P. Wagner, and his family. Wagner was a lawyer and politician and a well-respected citizen of the town of Atchison at the time. He was known for regularly holding picnics every year on his birthday and inviting all the children of the town to attend. Today, this might be seen as creepy in a very non-paranormal way. But at the time, these picnics drew national attention, even being attended by President Taft in 1911. At some point in his life, Wagner reportedly made a joke about having acquired his wealth not through practice of law or politics, but through a deal with the devil. Apparently, someone heard this joke and either took it seriously or just decided to run with it for fun. But today, the rumors of a satanic deal still persist. The stone gargoyles that adorn the house's roof are said to be a representation of this deal. Wagner died in 1918, and his widow continued to live in the house until her own death. Over the years, several people have tried to remove the gargoyles from the roof, with no luck. One later owner was even said to have died after a fall while attempting to retrieve them, and legend has it that an evil presence still lurks in the home. So, as with a lot of these stories, the paranormal aspects here are debatable. Still, you have to admit, those stone gargoyles do look pretty creepy. I can see how they would at least fuel these stories and rumors. At any rate, this does appear to be a private residence, so please don't visit there or bother anyone in the house or the neighborhood. There are plenty of photos and videos online if you really want to see more. Built in 1827, Fort Leavenworth in the city of Leavenworth is the oldest permanent settlement in the state. There are way too many ghost stories associated with the fort to go into here, but I'll share just a few. Several houses on the grounds that used to belong to officers have some ghostly legends attached. Guests and residents have reported things like faces in the backs of fireplaces and strange noises at night, though it's not clear what kinds of strange noises are heard. The chief of staff's quarters apparently has a ghostly tea party going on in perpetuity. People say they hear the sounds of a tea party coming from the parlor when it's empty. Again, it's not clear exactly what these sounds are. Tea glasses clinking together, tea being poured, people laughing and talking, someone asking another person how many sugars they'd like. Who knows? The general's residence is thought to be haunted by the ghost of George Armstrong Custer, a well-known but controversial military officer during Civil War times. Custer was court-martialed at the fort in 1867 for leaving his post. He was found guilty of misconduct and suspended for a year. He died years later and was buried elsewhere, but clearly the place still means something to him in the afterlife. Other supposed hauntings include a priest who was killed at a fire at the former site of St. Ignatius Chapel, and a black-haired woman in the rookery who runs at people, attempting to claw at them with her nails. Frankly, she doesn't sound like a very polite ghost. But perhaps the most well-known ghost on the grounds is that of Catherine Rich. Catherine and her family lived near the fort in the late 1800s, but their lives were turned upside down one day in 1880 when her two children went missing while gathering firewood. Catherine and her husband looked for their kids for months, with the former becoming a familiar face at the fort as she went there often in her search. However, several months later, she died of pneumonia and was buried in the National Cemetery on the fort grounds. But that spring, her husband found that their kids had been found alive and well. Of course, Catherine couldn't have known this as she was already dead by that point. Her spirit is said to still wander the area, wearing a dress and shawl, carrying a lantern, and calling out for the children she never knew were found safe. Arguably the most famous place on this list, the home known as the Sallie House was built all the way back in 1871. I talked about this house several years ago on this channel, one of the first videos I ever did, but my coverage of it is in desperate need of an update. The Sallie House sits at 508 North 2nd Street in a quiet neighborhood of Atchison. Yes, this is the third place on this list that's in Atchison. In fact, when I was researching for this video, I considered making it all about Atchison, since there are so many haunted places there. I don't know what they're putting in the water up in Atchison, but it certainly makes for some entertaining stories. As the stories go, the house was home to a doctor and his family in the early days. One day, a woman made a house call with her 6-year-old daughter Sally, who had severe abdominal pain. The doctor diagnosed little Sally with appendicitis and immediately began surgery. He gave her anesthesia, but was apparently so eager to begin, he started cutting into her before the drugs fully took effect. Sally screamed in agony, but died of shock on the operating table. In another version of the story, Sally was actually the doctor's daughter, and he wouldn't let her mom take her to the hospital because he was afraid they'd realize she was the product of their extramarital affair. There's a lot more contradictory information about there in the house and various occupants with the name Sally. I read at least one report that said a grown woman named Sally did live in the house at one point, but others said only a little girl named Sally had lived there. Sally is also different ages and different stories, as young as 3 and as old as 7. Whatever the truth, stories of the paranormal have occupied the house seemingly since Sally's death. Another later tenant was said to have a daughter who had an imaginary friend named Sally. When the little girl described her new friend, she gave a description that exactly matched little Sally when she was alive. Stories of hauntings in the house have been around for quite some time, but the most famous one happened in 1993. At the time, the house was occupied by the Pickman family, husband Tony, wife Deborah, and their newborn baby. A few months after moving in, the Pickmans started to notice strange things in their house. Candles would burn on their own and leave behind burnt fingerprints. The family dog would growl seemingly at nothing, especially outside the baby's nursery. The couple would enter the nursery to find all the baby's stuffed animals arranged in a circle, and a neighbor would ask Deborah why she left the nursery light on all night, even though she hadn't. But Tony Pickman seemed to bear the worst of it, with unexplained scratches on his chest and abdomen, the same areas where little Sally would have been cut open during her operation. He also claimed to have seen the ghost of a little girl late one night in the kitchen. The Pickmans moved out the following year, and the paranormal stories have continued, though not quite to the same degree. Today, the Sally house is unoccupied and open to the public. You can tour it or even stay overnight. Visitors over the years have reported all sorts of paranormal activity, including mysterious coldness, trained guide dogs refusing to enter the nursery, fully charged batteries completely draining quickly, and video equipment malfunctioning. Another visitor reported seeing a ghost girl suspended in the air in the closet doorway of the master bedroom. Others still have reported receiving unexplained scratches, similar to those that Tony Pickman suffered in 1993. So those are all the haunted places in Kansas I have for you today. Since there are so many supernatural stories here, and I found it so hard to narrow them down, I might do a part 2 in the future, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching, and have a creepy day.